Well, welcome back to another episode. This time it is the Mercedes Special Class, or S-Class as you may know it. And we're going to step back to 1972, which will disappoint a few of you, I know, because you want to go all the way back to the Ponton or the first generation. But that isn't technically an S-Class, okay? We're going to go to 1972, that's the first S-Class. However, we know that prior to that, there are models that would kind of be the S-Class of that time, but to keep the video a little bit short, because there's 7 generations, and even doing 4 or 5 generations in any detail whatsoever would take a very, very long time. So I'm going to try and rush through the generations as quickly as I can, whilst giving you enough detail on all of them. There are buyer's guides, just so you know, for some of the later generations. It's going to be I think it's going to be the 4th and 5th, possibly the 6th generation, but I'll let you know as we go through the guide. So, 1972, the first S-Class model comes out. It's the W116 model, and you have essentially an inline-6, some V8s, and a 5-cylinder diesel. And the market kind of gets split. Most people, I think, go for the V8. The inline-6, though, is not one that I would overlook if I was looking in this market, because actually it's a pretty good motor. Not as powerful as the V8, not as desirable at the time as the V8s, and because of that, on the used market, you will probably find there's lots of V8s out there. But looking at these today, I wouldn't overlook an inline-6, and actually, from when I worked in classics, the inline-6 had its own bit of the market. It had its own interest. People could kind of appreciate it for what it was at that moment in time, and slightly lower running costs really do help it out. But there's a 5-cylinder diesel, and for those of you that want something that's not going to be the fastest, not going to have the sort of silence and the refinement of a modern diesel engine, but has something very 1970s about it, is the best way I can put it. Those of you who were alive at the time, I wasn't, so I can't speak as if I was there. But when I worked in classics, each sort of decade had its own feel to it. And that diesel engine in that 1970s era car, it's a particular feel to it. Now, the V8s, as I say, they make this S-Class feel of its time. But, I don't know, something, I don't want to call it agricultural. That's so unfair and it's completely incorrect, really. But it's the best way I could tell someone who's only used to modern cars the feel that you get from that generation. It sort of has this thing of, you need to drive me. I'm here to be your car, but you need to drive me. And there is no middle ground to it. Kind of feels like it's going to let you down every 20 or 50 miles when it isn't, but it has that feel to it, like you kind of need to know your stuff when you're driving it. That is the feeling, okay? I don't want to confuse that for what I'm actually saying about the car. It's just a feeling they have. And it's a bit like old Defenders, old Land Rover Defenders. People love them because they have that feeling that as much as they may work and they may do a few hundred miles for you that day to the classic show and back, you kind of feel like any minute you're going to have to get out with the spanners and get it going. And it's a completely different feel. So anyway, but I wouldn't overlook the inline-6. I had a good drive in one of them quite a few years back now. And before that, I was completely sold on the idea of if you're going for one of these, you go for a V8. After that, I was actually like, inline-6. You get better running costs. It's not like it's so underpowered in modern traffic that you feel like you really, really should have got a V8. And so, yeah, inline-6. That's the end of the first generation. I know some of you will want a lot more details when it comes to these earlier cars, but unfortunately, every time I do that, it becomes a bit more of a classics episode, and I may start to bring those in the future, but we've got to get through and we've got to get all the way to the 7th generation. So let's go straight to the 2nd generation and into the W126. The hilarity for me here is I've just wrote the year down. I made a quick note ahead of me as a 1980 model. Okay, so 1980 is what the year. I thought for some reason it was 1981, but no, 1980. The hilarity for me is we've got V8s and inline-6s again. We've got turbo diesel engines, but there's so many variations of them, and I think we can get really lost by saying, okay, I made a quick note. You've got 2.6, 2.8, 3 litre on the inline-6, 3.8, 4.2, 5 litre, 5.6 on the V8, and then some 3 litres and 3.5 litres for the turbo diesel. I, again, like the inline-6s, I think the 3 litre inline-6 would be the one. I'd move a little bit closer if I wanted inline 6. On the V8s, 5 and the 5.6 do tempt me a little bit more. It's mainly because of parts supply. And I've said this so many times when I do the classics. Unfortunately, we could be talking about one of the best cars to have ever existed on this planet. And if it didn't have parts anymore, it would really just be a furniture piece. That's what you'd be buying, or an art piece. The S-Class does share enough parts when it comes to engines with some other Mercedes models, but not many. Okay, and because of that, you can find that with a lot of these engines outside of the inline 6 again, because the inline 6 makes its way in other variations into other Mercedes models. The V8 does get moved over around them as well, but there's a lot of variations of the V8. And because of that, again, I'd look inline 6, not to speak down about the V8. And if you've got a V8, I would probably keep it. If you can keep it in good nick and you've got a specialist that can deal with it and get you the parts and everything else, then that would be my move. If you're someone who knows a local Mercedes specialist, possibly you have a few newer Mercedes, and you're thinking to yourself, you've been on a couple of the classic websites and you're saying, I really would like to get one of the older Mercedes models. I would probably look into the second generation, mainly because of the variation of models, the amount that were sold in comparison to the first generation. You're going to have a bit wider choice and you can be a bit more choosy. Okay, 70s cars, 80s cars, I could talk till I'm blue in the face about engines. What I'm really talking about is condition, checking for rust, checking for previous repairs, checking that someone isn't trying to pull a fast one and get rid of a bad car. And so in these first generations, there's engines that I like, but the engine actually I think goes a little bit second to what's the body like, how has the interior been kept up, and a few of the other things. And because of that, I'd be looking at specialist websites, and I'd be looking at the specialist websites that will allow, okay, and this is a really important point for these first two generations, same as a lot of the classics, I'd speak and I'd message into websites that will allow you to go and visit the car yourself, okay, preferably with a friend. Now, if you get turned down on a request on doing that, don't write off a used classic like this, because I'll be honest with you, I remember, so for quite a few years I did photography. I still do a bit of photography here and there, but when I used to go out to people's homes and they had something like this, it was generally speaking, and this isn't always the case, but generally speaking, somewhere that they didn't want to be bothered by lots of people. They certainly didn't want lots of strangers pulling up on their doorstep. And a few of them did have properties they were a bit worried about people may sort of stake it out, because they had quite a lot of cars there. Okay, so if someone sort of pushes you back on that and says, look, I'm willing to, show you a video of a car of everything that you want to know, and I'm willing to put my word to this is how it is. We live in a world where everyone says don't trust each other. In the classics world, there's got to be a little bit of give and take on the trust factor. If someone's a bit apprehensive about letting you visit, I would say, okay, can we do a deal then where if I win, if you're bidding, or if I put my name to purchase it and I turn up and something is not as you described, and we'll agree what that could be. For example, a seat that's had a repair that you're not told about, that's a big one. Then I'm walking away, and I don't want you chasing me up saying I've wasted your time because you've wasted my time. That's just me being fair. I think Mercedes, particularly Mercedes collectors that I met, they generally had quite a few of them. They knew their stuff, but there was a little bit of an issue sometimes with the auction sites when people wanted to see. But if I could, I'd want to go and see it. And if you pull up somewhere and this person has 7 Mercedes, they mention a specialist that they use for all of their cars, and you can see it's quite nicely kept, preferably inside, well, you're onto a bit of a winner. But that doesn't mean that someone who's got a little garage or has to keep the car outside in a very busy street, but has got everything shining and tons of paperwork, isn't as good a buy as the other one. Just means you've got to do a little bit more work to understand, are they the person that's been keeping it in great shape, or are they the person that's been kind of letting it just go to bits? And Mercedes are built pretty well in this generation. That might be an understatement, actually, but they're still mechanical devices, and if you abuse them, they will break. Let's move on to the third generation. And so, in 1991, we get the W140 model. Price moves up quite considerably. About at the time, I think about 20 to 30% increase, depending on which country you're in, over the previous model. So there is a real step change. This model is moving up even further than the S-Class had been, but you're getting your money's worth. I would say if we look at modern cars, for example, if we look at cars between 2018 and 2025, prices have gone up just extraordinary amounts, and you're not really getting a lot more for your money. You are getting a few bits, but to be honest, I'd see this now with new cars. I'll go and drive around in a new car, test a new car, do a buyer's guide for a new car, and I think this car's moved up, 30% in price, and you're really not getting 30% more car. Well, in this particular generation of S-Class, I would say you are getting 30% more car if you're paying, or for those people that pay 30% more. And if on the used market, you do see one that's particularly nice on this one, and you think, oh, it's kind of similar money to the one before, and which one's going to go up more in value, I would stop looking at that point. You're looking at the wrong car. You need to look at this from a point of view, which one are you going to enjoy? Because it's really difficult with S-Class, unless you're looking at, some of the rare ones that were government owned, world leader owned, bulletproof models, celebrity owned. Unless you're looking at one of those, the market will have its peaks and troughs, and you may buy a good one, you may buy a bad one for a residual value, that is. It's more about buying a good car and enjoying it. Okay, so engines. This has to have one of those engines that's just going to make people smile. Okay, M120 V12, and if you buy it as an AMG specification, it's either 7.1 to 7.3. Did I make a note? Yeah, 7.1 to 7.3 if you buy an AMG, or a 6 litre in the regular V12 model. You pull up to a car show. Doesn't matter where it is in the world. Doesn't matter what time you want to go there. Doesn't matter what time of year it is. And you say, oh, I've got the 7 litre V12 model. People are going to want to see your car. Okay, so if you're buying this as something that you can enjoy at weekends, go to a nice picnic and a stately home, or whatever you've got close to you, nice river or something that you want to be able to just take a nice car to, or you want to just be going to the car shows in it and possibly run it into work every now and again just to show you off. Having a 7 litre engine, or even a 6 litre V12 is going to bring people out and want to have a look at it. Okay, so if that's what you're buying, that's the one to look at. But you are going to pay, let's just say, a premium for it. Not just in running costs, but in the actual price itself. And to be honest, finding ones that have had, if you find one that has had that ownership that we would all want in one of these cars, you're going to have to get your checkbook out and start writing some quite large numbers. So because of that, if what you want is something you can just sort of enjoy, have something that's nice, talk to people about, you have the inline six. There's the V8s again, but the inline six are just too tempting for me to ignore. And I think sometimes the inline six gets overshadowed by the fact there is a V8. The V8s are sort of over 4 litres. They're powerful, got a great sound to them, and we're in that world pre a lot of the sort of exhaust emissions equipment that stifle exhaust note, as we're going to go into the 2000s from the point of view of sort of that pure engineering sound. And also we've got some very well trusted but more basic in comparison to today's. I don't want to be unkind. I think sometimes when I do these videos, people say, oh, you're being a bit unkind to the engineering of the time. And I'm really not trying to. It's just you're comparing 2025 engineering to 1990 engineering. Of course, there's just a lot more computer-aided design. There's a lot more non-destructive testing that engineers can do today. And ultimately, there are a lot more elements that can be tested, even if it's virtual testing using computers, that couldn't be done back in the day. Or the computing power just wasn't there, even if the engineer wanted to. But that did lead to a little bit more of, let's overbuild the thing, okay, because we just don't know. We've done our tests and we think it will be fine, but let's do an extra 20-30% just in case. Let's put some headroom in there, which modern engineers do have to do, but I think they're a lot more precise. I'd probably put it that way. Because of that, when it comes to these older engines, the V8, it sounds glorious. It's great to warble around on. It's it's just a hint of a sound is the best way to put it. You got the hint of a sound. You're not in, a Mercedes SLS that's just barreling out noise. It's a hint of a sound, and it's quite a nice refined sound. If that doesn't bother you, go for an inline six. It's cheaper running costs, better fuel economy, and for the most part, you'll probably find that you'll be able to get quite a good deal on one, assuming it's had good ownership, over a V8. Give or take, different markets, but that's just a generalisation I'm making there. Diesel engines, 3 litre, 3.5. I made a quick note because I think there is a difference. Yeah, 606 and 603. Both inline six engines. It's an oddity with the diesel on these because it's not really that moment for diesel engines, even though at the time, if you did get a diesel one, it's built to last. They're all built to last, but these things are a bit more, I think they're pulling more engineering knowledge from what I would say is like the marine industry, trains, things like that. Forgotten the word for the train industry. Someone can remind me. I'll remember it later. But that industry, yeah, not going to get it. So they're having to pull in that longevity factor. And because of that, the sort of knowledge that's coming through on the diesel engines means that a lot of these were designed for those people that wanted to do huge mileage. They've done huge mileage. And actually, it's not so much the engine you need to be looking at. It's the rest of the car. And it's on this generation where I'd say if you can find one that's been well kept, possibly hasn't done the mileage, diesel's great. If you're looking in some parts of Europe where these have been used for the last 30 years as possibly like a high-end taxi, or they've been used by someone doing a lot of mileage, you really need to check that chassis over because the engine will do it. But locomotive engineering, that was the word I was thinking of. There we go. Otherwise, yeah, I think you may be on for a bit of a challenge in your hands when it comes to maintaining the rest of the car aside from the engine. Okay, that's the big advantage when you go for a lot of the petrol engines. Generally haven't done the mileage. They weren't bought to do a lot of the mileage, especially those inline six engines. People that were going to do them generally went for the larger V8 because that was kind of the mindset at the time. That's the end of the third generation. Let's jump onto the fourth generation. So the W220, this comes in 1998. And this car is one of the reasons why I've had to be a bit quick going through the first few generations because there are so many powertrains. I don't know what Mercedes were thinking at the time, but there are, depending on where you are in the world as well, because the variation amounts, I'll run through the engine sizing in a moment because that's just the quickest way to do this. But let's start with diesels because diesels are much simpler. Common rail diesel engines, 3.2, 4 litre. The 3.2 is absolutely fine for most people, but if a 4 litre is, of availability to you, they will keep running probably until the end of time, and then at the end of time they'll be able to run, a steamship or something. They're just not a steamship, a cruise ship. They have a longevity to them, but they need maintenance. And fortunately, they will go quite long periods of time with fairly minor maintenance, and then they'll throw a big maintenance bill at you. And because of that, most people look at the 320. The 320 is also widely shared across the Mercedes vehicles at the time, and so it makes it easier for parts supply. It makes it easier to have the knowledge base if you're going into a garage. A lot of people know that 320. The 4 litre, people know it, but you're going to need a specialist that really has good knowledge of that engine. And if you have the 3.2, that's just, yeah, everyone. If you went to a Mercedes specialist and you had the 3.2 diesel and they said, oh yeah, I don't really see too many of these, you're either in two situations, in the USA, or a country that didn't get, or Saudi Arabia or somewhere that didn't get any diesels, or you've gone to the wrong place and this is not an actual Mercedes specialist. Okay, those are your only two options. Everyone should know these 3.2 diesels unless they were not in the market or sold in such tiny numbers for whatever reason that no one has them. That's the only excuse. Every other excuse just shouldn't wash. Okay, and the 3.2 does very, very well. But as I'm sure you all know I'm about to say, this is an era of Mercedes where they needed to reinvest in the company, and the generation that went before will be one of those cars that I think will just keep going forever. If it's maintained, it will keep going forever. This generation, I actually sold this generation used. I don't think they were still going around new when I was selling cars. It was the next generation that was new. And the trouble with these were partly due to specification. Mercedes tried to widen the amount of specification, and on the low end of the S-Class, there are a lot of materials used that within 2 or 3 years, they do not look like they should in an S-Class. That's the fairest way to say it, okay? Because I'm sure Mercedes didn't mean to do that, but it was the outcome of all of this. And when you used to sell them 3-4 years old, base spec ones, or base spec is unfair, lower specification S-Class models really looked like they'd done 50,000 miles, 60,000, 100,000 kilometers. They looked like they had done that from the inside. The outside may have been, freshly polished and looked great, but the inside just didn't wear it as well. And that is such a shame compared to the earlier generations that really kept that luxury feel. Even at 10 years old, 15 years old, they still had it. These ones, by the time they're 10 years old, some of them just look awful. And it's just partly because the material investment that was needed wasn't there. Okay. And as I say, because some cheaper materials were used to get an entry price point down. And I don't blame the new buyers for going for those cars, because I'm sure they look quite nice in the showroom, but they just were not built to last. And they were very difficult, if I'm honest, to sell. I have very bad memories of trying to sell these used because, it was a recession at the time as well. And there were just better choices on the market. And you were trying to sell these things, they were very difficult to move. Okay. So I think now, if they've done mileage, unless they've been very, very well kept, or they were one of the top end models that did get some nicer materials put in the interior, particularly I'm talking about seats here, then they're going to feel old and worn. And it's one of those eras that I think Mercedes would probably like to forget. However, I will put a caveat to that. At the very end, it does get better. Okay, so 98, 99, 2000, 2001, that's really where, 2002, this is really where I think there's, I can't remember when the announcement comes out, it's around 2003, that Mercedes say, we're going to reinvest in our brand. We understand, we have had the feedback and it's time, and we realise we haven't spent enough money. And it was models like the S-Class where it really shows that they hadn't done, and they hadn't kept up with the pack. As sort of the Audi A8 is coming to market, and with a newer model in the early 2000s, and the 7 Series BMW is there. Some of the American luxury cars are there. The Mercedes S-Class should have been sort of a chin above, because it was there like that in the previous generations. And for the early ones of this one, it wasn't. Let's run through the petrol engines here. I'm looking forward to this because I've got to try and get a lot in my memory. So it's a 2.8, a 3.2, a 3.7, a 4.3, then a 5 litre, a 5.5, a 5.8, a 6 litre, and I did make a quick note, I'll have to double check it down here, sorry, at 5.4, and a 6 litre. Yeah, fine, sorry. I had to check that because then there's supercharged on some of those. As you can imagine, with that huge amount of, it's just such a wide span of engines, I don't know quite why Mercedes felt the need to do it. I kind of get it. For some markets, they knew that they had to go for a slightly smaller engine for tax reasons, or there had been demand for a bit more power, or whatever it may be. Supercharge on the 5.4 is it 5.4? Yeah, it is. I made a quick note there. That comes in the later years. And for me, that's kind of where the Mercedes quality starts to come back. Like an S500 on the early years. To be honest, if I was looking at one of these today, it would be for one of two reasons. I'd be looking at one of the big horsepower models, V12, 6 litre, supercharged V8. That's one end of the market. Or I'd be trying to find just the nicest 2.8 or 3.2 that I could. Or an S500. But at 25 years old, a lot of them just feel 25 years old. Okay, I don't want to be too unkind to this generation. I know it's a favourite of quite a lot of you. Okay, but I can't, I'm not going to lie about it. That's my experience of them. It's not that I dislike this model. It's just that particularly at 25 years old now, unless it's an AMG model, one of the big supercharged engine models, or it's one of the more basic models that probably is depreciated pretty heavily and you're not expecting the world from, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. And because of that, as I say, the diesel also is quite tempting from the point of view of at least you should be able to get a deal on it. But if it's done 200,000 miles, 300,000 kilometers, some cars can hide that. I was having a chat with a friend of mine I used to sell cars with, who's worked at a load of manufacturers now, and he was telling me he went to recently view a used M5 V10. He's already got one. He was looking to get another one because it was the right colour combination that he'd been looking for. And it had apparently 50,000 miles on it, and the outside, he reckoned, had 50,000 miles on it, but the inside had more like 150,000 miles on it. And he said to the seller exactly what I would say to all of you. The outsides of cars age because they are exposed to everything, and it really is down to the upkeep of the owner how much you can negate some of that damage and be willing to pay for repairs of stone chips, scratches, all that sort of stuff to keep it in top condition. But the inside, unless it's in a desert or it's in the freezing end of the world, it wears with age. It doesn't wear so much with time. So I've seen a couple of cars that are 30 years old with 1,000 miles on them, 2,000 miles on them, and you open the door and you look in, they don't smell like a brand new car, but they still have that newer car smell. And all the materials look fantastic, and people have covered off the windows, they've kept them in air conditioned or climate controlled storage units and stuff like that, and it's the inside where you can really tell this genuinely is a couple of thousand miles. These cars at 200,000 miles, 300,000 kilometers, probably will fill every single mile of that. Okay, don't want to be unfair, don't want to be unkind, but I'm trying to be honest with you, because if you're looking at buying one, I don't want you to overspend if you don't have to. Fifth generation, the W221. Now, depending on where you are in the world, you get this car from around 2005, 2006 or 2007. So there's a production gap. This happens on a few Mercedes at the time, where the old model is still getting produced, it's still being sold in some countries. And so you might see model year, say 2007, and it's actually a 2005, like a very, very late 2005. Don't be put off. No one's trying to scam you with that. It's just an oddity. Sort of Mercedes began production in Germany in like late 2004. They started to transfer the production line over from the older model, but at the same time they were still actually building the older model, and some of their world factories were still building the older model. And so, yeah, it's a 2007 model year, but 2005 will be the very, very earliest you probably will be able to find one. I will make a note though that in 2005, sales of the fourth generation take a real upswing, and that is as a result of the reinvestment that Mercedes make. And so if you're looking at the fourth generation, you kind of want the switchover year where it's almost going into this fifth generation, because you'll see actually it's a better car, just better to sit in, nicer place to be, better materials. You can notice the difference. Okay, so just something to bear in mind there. Now, this is the first generation that has a buyer's guide on the channel, so if you want to check out an in-depth guide, you can do after this video on this generation and the next generation. On this one, it is almost exclusively V-configured engines. Okay, the only exception to that is a 2.1 diesel engine, 4-cylinder inline-4 engine. Diesels make a fantastic argument for themselves in this generation. 3-litre diesel, 4-litre diesel, 2-litre diesel, 2.1 diesel. The 2.1, that will feel like you're pushing it a lot of the time, but not an unreliable engine. Okay, bear in mind, if you're looking at these, if you can buy an 05, 06, that will be before 05, 06 going into 07, and you're in Europe, that's just before regulations come in that enforce DPF filters, or DPFs. But Mercedes do bring it in early. As I say, they're 2007 model year vehicles, so you may find that almost all of them have that. But if they don't, and they didn't have it brand new, they shouldn't require it for annual tests, so you can have a bit of a benefit from there. But the 2.1 actually will last a very long time. However, it's just hugely overshadowed by the 3-litre V6 on the diesel engines, and then the 4-litre as well. I would just look at the 3-litre. You can go for the 4-litre, but the 3-litre will have, again, it's shared across a wide number of Mercedes models. Everyone should have seen it. Everyone should know how to do any repair that you need. They're pretty quick, actually. they're not a 6-litre V12, which we'll come on to in a minute, but for your sort of average car, even today, they'll keep up with modern traffic. You will not feel like you're going slowly. The torque feel is from very low down in the RPM range, and you have to be sort of pushing the engine a little bit to feel that there isn't much more to give. Okay, compared to like the V8s. The V8s on the petrol engines, they feel like they're going to keep giving more. So if you're at, say, 3,000 RPM on the V8 and you really want to overtake someone and get past them, you can do that in the V8. The diesel, as I say, you're all out of puff at about 3,500, 4,000 RPM. It needs to get to the next gear, give you a torque fill and go again, but it's going to be a bit slower progress. So it depends how important that is to you. If I'm honest, if you use this for cruising around, just enjoying being in an S-Class, the 3-litre diesel will be a fantastic pairing for you. A lot of you get the 3-litre diesel. And because material quality steps up in this generation, as I say, on the buyer's guide, you'll learn about all the bits that you need to be aware of. But as those 3-litre diesels have aged and they've had a lot of mileage put on them, if they were bought in a nicer specification, taken well care of, cleaned up nicely, you can still feel like you're in a large luxury vehicle for, well, really not a lot of money. Okay. Over on the petrol engines, so we start with a V6 engine, go up to a V8 engine, and then a V12. The V6s they're okay. They wouldn't be the preference, having driven quite a few of them. I can kind of understand why they weren't high sellers, because if efficiency was important to you, buy the diesel, okay? If power was important and smoothness was important of sort of progression and having a little bit of a nice noise to go with it, and having some of the higher specifications that goes in, say, an S500 model, S550, then it was a V8 model. Okay, so the V6 petrol engines, they kind of get left behind, and because of that, unless you're sort of really pushed to have a good deal and that's what's driving your buying decision, I would look up to the V8. If you go, though, for the V12, you can go for a 5.5 or a 6-litre twin-turbo engine. And that, I'm hesitant to call cars fast anymore, because it's hard to know, depending on what you're used to, what's fast. If you've been in a 600 horsepower plug-in hybrid car that has a torque fill capacity in it, then you will not find older V12s with a 6-litre engine fast. You'll say things like, "Oh, they're not fast, they're quick," and that's ludicrous, because if you get in a 1.6 petrol engined Golf of that generation, the V12 twin turbo feels like it's from just another planet. So it's unfair. But I can give you the example of, again, speaking to that same friend, V10 M5, and he said it's fast, but it's not fast. And what he means is you've got to be driving it to its limits, and you are fast. You are extremely fast on the road. But the car next to you that's brand new, it's got some sort of turbocharging going on, twin turbocharging, possibly has a mild hybrid system for torque filling, or has a plug-in hybrid system. And as you go through the revs, you've got near 100% of your power 1 second into the rev range, because everything just boosts and you go. Then the older style of engines where you've got to rev them out and then the power comes in like you wouldn't believe, it's like it's thunder and lightning that comes in, but you've got to get up the rev range to get there. Then they don't feel as quick. And because you don't, for most people, they don't drive at 4,000 to 6,000 RPM all the time, or 4,000 to 8,000 RPM if you've got an engine that will do it. They drive at 2,000 to 5,000 RPM, and engineers know that today. Okay, so these are very fast cars, depending on what you're coming from. That's the fairest way I can put it. From my point, as I say, the diesel is probably the winner for me, but something like a nice V8 with a 5-litre capacity, it will take more taking care of. Hopefully, though, you'll find owners that have spent the money taking care of it, and the body and the chassis has also been taken care of. Suspension has been replaced, because you're moving into the generation of air suspension, things like that, where honestly, engines, as long as it doesn't blow up, is possibly not going to be your biggest cost. It's going to be other elements of the car, especially engine electronics now. Okay, so that's more where I would be looking as we're into this generation. That's the end of that one. Let's go into the 6th generation. And so the W222, 2013 to 2020, in many ways, it's the last of, I'd say, there's a great generation of cars that came along. After this, we move much more towards fancy tech and, being assisted everywhere and the car kind of telling you what to do. And I don't want to be too critical of it because some people like that. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying if you're the other type of people, this is the generation. Now, fortunately for you, they have quite a few engines. Unfortunately for me, because I have to go through all of them and try and memorize engine sizes and everything else. But what I would say is here you'll have the widest variation for things like hybrid, diesel, and petrol. Okay. Let's talk about, should we talk about the hybrids for a minute? Because I made a quick note on the hybrids. So they do the 3 litre, and I think it is just a 3 litre. Because today, no, I haven't made a note of it, so I would assume it's not. Oh, yeah, sorry, it's Blue Tech hybrid. Okay. 3 litre petrol, and then the smaller 2 litre or 2.2 diesel engine is paired up with a hybrid system, self-charging hybrid system, which I think if you're out there and you want an S-Class, but you want the running costs of an A-Class, then that's the one for you, the small engine diesel. It's quick enough and it's got enough modern engineering to try and get those turbos to spool up and that hybrid assist to push you along, that actually you don't feel shortchanged. If you were coming out of, say, a V6 or a low-powered V8 of the previous generation, and you ended up in a 2.2 diesel hybrid on this generation, you're going to miss some of the top end and you're going to miss some of the wafting ability. But actually, the power that you're going to have, it's not going to feel like too much of a letdown, is what I would say. And then you'll look at the fuel bill at the end of the month and the maintenance bill, because it's a small battery in there. Hopefully that shouldn't let you down. And even if it does, it's not like it's a huge battery pack. And on the other side of it, maintaining a 4-cylinder small diesel engine is not that costly. So from that side of it, it should balance things out for you. Otherwise, though, the 3 litre diesel is still there, and that will still be a favourite of almost all of you, and you'll know that it's very capable and should be good for hundreds of thousands of kilometres or miles. At this point, it doesn't even matter, because I could be saying 500,000 miles and 700,000 kilometres. This engine should just keep going, okay, as long as it's maintained. It does have a few things that are worth checking out on the guide, but ultimately, maintain it well, keep it with a specialist, and it'll take care of you. Petrol engines. I mentioned there was a hybrid. It's a plug-in hybrid. I would probably go for the self-charging hybrid on the diesel if I really wanted hybrid. However, if you can't have diesel for whatever reason and you want plug-in hybrid, then there is the option paired with the 3 litre engine. It wouldn't be my pick. I quite like plug-in hybrids a lot of the time, but I have to be aware of, if we're talking about a 10 to 12, well, let's say a 10-year-old one, I don't want to say that's the car to go for in case you face a battery pack problem. Fortunately, it's a smaller battery pack on these. Generally speaking, they're quite reliable, so you shouldn't face an issue, but ultimately, this is still a generation when you have, there's an inline 6, there's V6s, there's V8s, and for those of you, there's the bigger V8s as well, all turbocharged. And for those of you that want something to really stand out, there's the V12. It's still around, and it's probably, it is the last of that great era of V12 Uber saloons. This is it. Okay, so for that reason, the inline 6 does a good job. If you're in China, by the way, there's a 2 litre petrol engine. A couple of other Asian countries get it as well. It's not popular throughout the world, but it is there if you're in those Asian markets. I think that was a tax incentive. I don't know if it went to Italy. It might have gone to Italy as well, but I'd have to check that. If you're Italian and you know, then please let me know. What do we got? I made a quick note again. Let's run through them. 3 litre, 3.5, 4.7, 5.5, and 6 litre. So that's your engine sizes. The 4 litre in there, which is the 4 litre V8 twin turbo. That's the engine that goes into the C63 of this generation, and it goes into Aston Martins at the time. So you're not going to be short of power if you go for that one. And actually, it's not bad fuel efficient wise. It's not great, but compared to the slightly bigger engines that they put in these, that would probably be my pick. That's sort of a later on addition. I don't think the 6.2, did I make a note for 6.2? No, I didn't. So that's not there. In fact, it was never going to be there. The 6 litre V12 twin turbo, you're going to pay a big premium to have that, but you're going to have something that I'd be surprised now if engines like that really lose any money. They're going to lose a bit because, some of them will still be like 2019. But knowing you're not going to get them again, not this side of £250,000 or dollar specialist supercars, you're not getting this. And even then, if you think of the manufacturers left actually doing a V12, you start to get a very short list. And when you start to say, do any of them sell for less than 6 figures, that list sort of disappears to zero. Okay, so this opportunity to have a V12, it's there here, but you are going to pay a hefty premium and you're going to be paying for maintenance. And so you are really going to have to want it. And unfortunately, I really don't know what the market will do. No one does. As I say, I'd be surprised if it has a huge depreciation curve. I think it will still be desirable in years to come, but that's not the reason I'd buy it. I'd buy it to experience it, enjoy it. And then in 30 years from now, if everything is a washing machine engine, you can say, oh, I remember when I had a twin turbo V12. Nice. That brings us to the end of this generation. I don't want to go on too much because we sort of hybridize and that takes some of the market. Obviously, there's a diesel scandal at Volkswagen, which affects a lot of manufacturers across the world in 2017, going into 2018. And that does shift some market away from the diesel engine, which is unfortunate, especially if you are looking at that facelift era of this S-Class, that diesel sales do start to just shy away a little bit. They're still there, you're still able to find plenty, but I would say that's the engine pick, and it's just unfortunate they start to sort of slightly pull out of the market, especially in some countries after about 2018. Just good to know on that one. Let's go to the last generation. For the Gen 7, the W223, it comes in 2021. Because of that, all the engines are mild hybrid. Diesels, you just have a 2.9 diesel engine now. And I'm going to pull that one out and I'm going to say, if you're looking today, that's the pick of the bunch. I know a lot of you won't be able to buy it because you'll have tax incentives on going for hybrid, and a lot of new lease sales now are going hybrid because these vehicles are generally used in cities, and so the plug-in hybrid models do get a big push on them. But that 2.9 diesel is the sort of used owner pick. If you're looking and saying, I'm going to buy a relatively new car and I'm going to keep it for 10 years until the world has figured itself out of what we're doing next. Are we doing EV? Are we doing hybrid? Are we going back to engines with some sort of renewable fuel? And you don't want to get involved in that huge argument and you just want to own a car for 10 years that you can enjoy. There's a 2.9 6-cylinder diesel engine. That's the engine for you. End of story. Okay. Everyone else. There is the 4-litre V8 paired with a hybrid system. That thing is fast. It has torque fill from basically 0 RPM. You've got a punch all the way up the rev range. And for those that are mourning the loss of the V12, the fact you have the hybrid V8s in this generation that are, if you're someone who always wanted your S-Class to be hugely powerful, it's actually this generation that you'd look at, because there is no engine speed or drive speed below 150 miles an hour that you're going to be thinking, I just need a bigger engine. It's just not. These are cars, if you watch them online do sort of drag racing and stuff, they will launch from 0 and then just continually push all the way until they hit the limiter. And that's how the engineers have made them. It's fantastic. Obviously, the diesel doesn't have quite that same sort of push all the way along. Really, it sort of takes a minute to launch. It gets going. Once it's up to about 40 miles an hour, it will push its way to 120, and then it will slow off a little bit. That's because it's got less assistance than a lot of the petrol engines. And ultimately, unless you commute on the Autobahn every single morning and you drive like your hair's on fire because you need to get to a meeting that you've forgotten about, it's not important. Most people are going to be quite happy going quickly from 30 sort of onwards up to say 100 miles an hour. They don't need the top end past that. and launching yourself off the lights in an S-Class is probably not the move, should I say. The silent driving of the plug-in hybrids is very attractive. Okay, and I don't want to. It may sound like throughout this I've had a bit of a downer on the hybrids. I'm not having a downer on the hybrids at all. I actually like the hybrid models on most cars. It's just that I know some people, when they're looking at these on the used market, are saying they're 3 or 5 years old, they've had a big hit on depreciation, and now I want to own them for 5 years. And in that time, you're going to run out of the battery's warranty with the manufacturer. So you have to be a little bit sort of wise to that and know that you're going to have to either pay out for a warranty or have some money in the kitty, because if you have then a problem with a battery, it's not like if you have a problem with a diesel engine and you've suddenly got a big bill for something mechanical, you've probably got to remove a battery pack and fit either a used or a new battery pack, because we're still getting there with people being able to do repairs and specialist work on battery packs for reasonable money. We'll get there, but we're not there quite yet. Aside from that, there's a 3 litre, is it V6 or inline 6? Oh, do both, yeah. Sorry, no, it is an inline 6. The 3 litre inline 6, which is just mild hybrid, would be my pick if you don't want diesel or you can't have diesel and you don't want hybrid. That engine, I'd take it for a drive and you'll see what I mean. I think if you have something like an S500 on the previous generation and you say to yourself, okay, don't really need to go S500 again, you know, I don't need a 4 litre V8 with a hybrid system or whatever it may be, let me try the 3 litre. I think you'll find, actually, because of the mild hybrid system, because of the way they've designed that engine, you will be happy enough stepping from the V8 into the inline 6 without plug-in hybrid assistance. That is all of the S-classes. I've done it as quickly as I can. I know these videos do get quite long, so I hope you can appreciate that I also couldn't go into huge amounts of details on some of them. I'm sure I've missed something, especially I know some of you will be owners and you'll say, oh, you didn't talk about this aspect of my one. I'm sorry for that. It's just whenever I do, these become way over an hour long and people will say, oh, it's too long. I wanted to just hear about this generation, blah, blah, blah. So trying to keep it concise as possible. If you've been an owner though, and there's something that you think, oh, I missed that, I'd like to add it in, because people will look at the comments underneath this video. Put a comment. It's always great to see people, especially owners or people looking for a car. I've had a few comments recently of people who were looking to buy, watched the video, went out, did their test driving, came back and said, watched the video, saw the buyer's guide, and I went for this one. And that's always fantastic for me to hear. Other than that, I hope you have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next one.